Dun, 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 dun. Well, if you've been a long listener to the podcast, I hope you're not missing the intro music too much. In case I didn't mention this first video in the series or you missed that, I've kind of cut back on all the work I've put into all this stuff, trying to streamline things. My current job is busier than it was last year, but I still want to produce stuff. So used to have a nice theme song, used to make videos in addition to audio, but here we are, just keeping it simple. But how are you guys doing? We have made it through the fifth book. Hope you enjoyed the bonus episode that I put out this week. And if you're listening to these live, sorry that this one is a little bit delayed. Life stuff going on, but I'm still committed, still reading. So I'm in the book of Joshua already, and just plan to get this recorded. Some stuff got in the way, so here we are. So fifth book of the Bible, Deuteronomy. Not too bad of a read. You do get some more laws and repetitions and things, but what's really interesting about Deuteronomy is the narrative framing around it. If you haven't picked up on it at this point, so we have the first 5 books. You ask kind of any child who wrote the first 5 books of the Bible. Well, everyone would say Moses, and that's pretty much accurate. Even in the New Testament, Jesus refers to them as the writings of Moses or the law of Moses. But did he write every single word in those 5 books of the Bible? And that answer is an obvious no. We get that from a few different areas, but you can just easily look right at the end of Deuteronomy, the book that we just finished, and you have a story about how he died and was buried. And so how could he have written that? But there's more evidence than just that. Although the perspective of Deuteronomy, this Deuteronomy actually starts with I don't have the exact phrasing, but like across the Jordan. So it's like from the mindset of somebody on the west side of the Jordan in Israel, talking about what happened over on the east side of Jordan, where Moses was giving the speeches. So even where the narrator is framing his reference frame from, he's looking over from Israel. So that whoever put the final touches on this and is narrating this is on that side. Now, the narrator doesn't put a lot of words in. He's kind of framing things. He'll have a little bit in the middle, sometimes pop up in between. He finishes off the book. And this is actually something to keep in mind for future books of the Bible. I believe it is Lamentations, maybe Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes, I believe, is framed the same way, where you have the author or narrator of the book who kind of opens it. You have hey, blah, blah, blah. These are the sayings of the king of Jerusalem, presumably King of Solomon. Now, the narrator is not Solomon. He's framing the whole of the text. So he kind of intros it and then kind of cuts away from the narrator to the main part of it. And then the narrator comes out at the end and kind of closes it. But the point of what he's doing there is to try to help you interpret what's being said in the correct way. So very interesting. Keep your eye out for that, because oftentimes there's other people putting their handiwork into these books, even though we credit Moses with the first 5 books. There's been other things, if you've been paying attention to your reading, even all the way back in Genesis, you'll have moments where they set up stones or dig a well, or they pass through a city, and it'll make sometimes it's in parentheses, sometimes it's just, and still to this day, or it is still there to this day. If Moses is writing this, remember, Moses never went into the promised land, so he doesn't have that knowledge of that it was there. So this is coming from somebody who wrote this later. Now, who that is could be Joshua. We know that Joshua helped Moses a ton. Could be some of the high priests, could have been kind of framing scenes. So there's a lot of debates. This is really cool to get into. But one thing that's, at least I had growing up, and I don't think I would have said it this way, but in my mind, it was just like the Bible was just something written out all at one time. Here it is, all done. But that's not how it kind of came to be. But don't be scared of that. God used human beings and how we operate to write this beautiful story. And so there's people that we know of that wrote the Bible, because we have multiple points in Exodus and Deuteronomy that show Moses writing down these words. So we do know that some of these words, that's definitely Moses, because it is mentioned that he wrote down some words. Some people we can theorize wrote parts of the Bible, and then I'm sure there are some unnamed people that had some finishing touches and worked on parts of the Bible. And that's nothing to be scared of. It's just more to dig into, learn, and enjoy. So that's kind of the framing of Deuteronomy. You have a narrator who kind of intros it. And this is all framed as one day, one group of speeches by Moses to the Israelites before they cross the Jordan and go into the promised land. So that's sort of the framing of Deuteronomy. Some parts of it read like a story and it kind of goes pretty well. And then some parts of it seem repetitive. Like you sit there and you're like, I kind of read this. And that's kind of where the Deuteronomy gets its name. It's called Deuteronomy. I believe it's from like second law or second giving, something like that. So it's repeating a lot. But what's interesting and what you can do is if you read a part and it says, hey, that sounds familiar, go back to where it was mentioned in Exodus, Leviticus, wherever it was. And sometimes you'll notice that things are slightly different. Moses is speaking to a different audience. This is no longer the wilderness generation. It is now the generation that is going into Israel. And so the original laws, which were set for the Israelites out in the wilderness, well, they need a little bit of an adjustment because now we're going into the land. And so we got to make these tweaks so that they work. We actually get some narratives that happen in the story where Israelites come up to Moses. Namely, that comes to mind is like the 5 daughters of, and I can't even remember the guy's name, but it starts with a Z. Zephyr, and I don't know, I'm just making it up off my mind. So he got his 5 or 6 daughters that come up and they say, hey, so our dad died, and it's not like he was a rebellious person that died. He just died of his own causes. We don't have any brothers, so his inheritance is going to go to somebody else. Shouldn't we be able to inherit that land so that it doesn't go to somebody else? And Moses is like, oh, well, I mean, that's a good point. And they take it to God. God says they're right. So there's a tweaking of how inheritance works because now they're going in the land. The land is being divided up into the different tribes, and it's important that it stays within that tribe. And if, so it kind of comes up and there's an adjustment to the law, which is really good for us to now go, okay, so there are other laws in the Torah. Am I supposed to follow those laws? Well, no, those weren't written for this time. Those were written for that time with those people. But how can we now take what's the truth that's underneath it and apply that to our lives now? And as we get to the New Testament, you'll see a lot of this where Jesus and Paul reflect on laws and stories from the Old Testament, the Torah especially, and they interpret what that means in their context. So, namely, Jesus points to the law of don't murder. And he's like, well, what does that tell me? Well, I shouldn't even hate my brother. And very interesting one, Paul points back to a law about there's a law that says don't keep your oxen from eating the grass as it's treading the wheat, something like that. I'm not a farmer. Basically, and Paul goes, he connects that to paying your pastors or paying your leaders. Essentially, if somebody come in and they're speaking and giving you a word, they're working for the Lord, don't neglect to pay them. And he used that law about oxen to make that point. So he's kind of going to what's the underneath source of that law, reflecting on it and saying you shouldn't make somebody work and then not even give them their basic needs to live. So very interesting. So we can do the same thing with the law. We read it and reflect on the law and the stories and how God has orchestrated a thing and apply it to our own lives. So very cool. So even though we're reading these old laws that don't seem to apply, there is some underlying principles that can apply to our lives. And I think that's kind of illustrated through Deuteronomy and how they are reframing laws for this new group of people. What else about Deuteronomy? You get a lot about the blessings and curses, depending on if Israel is to follow God's laws or if they choose not to follow God's laws. And if you know the rest of the Hebrew Bible, the rest of the story, you look at those curses and you're like, "Ooh, that's going to happen." And even Moses in his final speech is like, "Look, if you follow this, it's all going to go great." But I've lived with you guys for 40 years in the wilderness. You're not going to do it. It's not going to work. So he even predicts, like, this isn't going to work. And if you know the rest of the Bible, you're kind of like, and if you know humanity, you're just like, yep, this isn't going to work. So for a time, it seems like it. But there's always this downward spiral. And that's when we get to Judges. That's exactly how the book is framed, is just a downward spiral. It starts off, you're like, oh, okay, that Gideon, he's pretty nice. He messed up at the end. He's not perfect, but okay, he was fine. And you get to Samson, and you're like, well, that's cool, but boy, he sure didn't live great, and it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And so it spiraled. Let's see here. I think that's about all that I want to talk about Deuteronomy. If you didn't catch it, my bonus episode, I talked a lot about the Torah, the whole verse by books, and how there's a lot of structure. So we are moving out of the Torah, and now we are entering into, in our normal Bibles, we enter into what is called the books of history. I kind of start with Joshua and go through Ezra and Nehemiah, I believe. In the Jewish Bible, which my plan sort of models off of, it's going into the prophets. So we have Joshua, Judges, 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings. I think Ezra, no. And then I think we get the prophets, the 3 major prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, and then the 12 minor prophets. That sounds about right. I don't have my plan in front of me, but I think I'm getting that right. So we're moving into the prophets, which will be very interesting and fun to read. And I think that we're going to, as we read, we're going to be thinking back on the Torah and remembering a bunch of those first 5 books of the Bible and how they get pulled upon for all these stories that are going on. And we're still looking at the major theme. Right there at the beginning of Genesis, there's this promise. Somebody's going to come to defeat evil. And we thought it was going to be Moses. Not quite. But hey, maybe we got Joshua. But we'll see that nobody quite reaches that level of Moses. But there's still this hope. Somebody's coming. And this will get flushed out more with different introductions to different characters and roles like kings and judges. Things like that. And so keep your eye out for that. Plenty more to learn. I'm really enjoying this. I hope you guys are sticking with the plan. February, by this point, you're either still doing it or I've lost you. If I lost you, you're probably not listening to this. So if you're listening to this, if you're still with me, we're going through this plan together, and we're going to be reading the Bible in a year. Technically, you could be reading the Bible twice in a year. I have managed to read each book twice, and I think it's helping me really kind of have a good understanding of the general structure. I've really been digging in the Bible past 4-ish years, and I've been impressed with kind of just like, I'm not great at memorized verses, but my wife would be like, oh, isn't there a story about such and such? I'm like, yeah, probably around Matthew 8, and she'll flip there. Oh, yep, there it is. I was like, all right. I kind of got a general sense of where different things are. So I think the more you get into it, the more it's just going to be fresh on your mind. So that's kind of the goal. Okay, 15 minutes are up. Thank you guys so much. I hope that your plans are going well. Always update me. Love to hear from you guys, and have a great time. I'll see you in the video. Bye.